and welcome to Nyden on Negotiation, the podcast. I'm your host, Jeanette Nyden. My philosophy is that you cannot change the other person you negotiate with, but you can change how you negotiate with them to achieve better outcomes for you or your organization. This podcast series includes interviews, lectures, speeches, and webinars, and includes materials from all four of my books. For more information and free resources, please visit www.jnyden.com. Enjoy.
I am so pleased to have Kate Vitasek here today with us. Kate Vitasek is the author of many books, and today I'd like to highlight the fact that she is the co-author with myself of the Vested Outsourcing Manual and Getting to We. Today we're going to be talking about 10 years, celebrating 10 years of the Vested Outsourcing Manual. Welcome, Kate. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, thanks, Jeanette. Glad to be here. So I'm a professor at the University of Tennessee. I'm in the College of Business, and I study the art, science, and practice of highly collaborative business relationships. And our research was originally funded by the United States Air Force to look at how businesses can work better together to get a better business outcomes. And that led to the methodology known as Vested. And our first book came out in 2010, which is Vested Outsourcing: 5 Rules That Will Transform Outsourcing. And kind of a fun story, but that's, we had known each other, but that's kind of over a lunch conversation. It's like, well, how do you put these rules into a contract? And that's kind of an interesting evolution.
It is an interesting evolution because I remember seeing the first galleys of the 5 Rules book and talking about the ways in which businesses were not only going to be excited about this work, but the questions that they were going to have. Can you tell us a little bit more specifically about how the manual following the original Vested Outsourcing book came about? What prompted the actual development of the manual?
Yeah, it's actually an interesting, fun story. So I was giving a keynote speech in Edinburgh at a IACCM conference, now WCC World Contracting and Association. And Catherine Kawamoto had been a big fan of ours, and she introduced me to Jackie Archer. And we were actually sitting in a bar in Edinburgh. And we, on the back of a napkin, said, well, what would be the contractual elements? And I had seen lots of contracts. Catherine had seen lots of contracts, so had Jackie. And we just began to think about these rules and where, how would you write a contract? And literally we framed out something on the back of a napkin. And then in the conference, I began to noodle on that and move things around. And then during the breaks, I'd come back to Catherine and Jackie and say, well, what do you think about this? Because in my head, I was mapping out the way people traditionally think about contracts and then remapping those to the 5 rules. And then we began to say, well, I think I'd love to get, Jeanette, you and I had collaborated and knew each other on a personal level. And I had suggested, why don't we wrap you into that? And that's kind of how it is. The 4 of us came together to take these rules and elements and take the vested theory down a notch into the manual.
Yeah, that was a fun time. Very exciting, thinking about the ways in which the manual would really be the step-by-step process to help businesses implement vested thinking. People were really on board. Yeah, we need to have a collaborative relationship. We need to have a partnership, but they didn't have those step-by-step tools. What's been the biggest impact of the Vested Outsourcing Manual?
Well, I think it just allows people to see tactically how you put these rules into practice. Dell in one of the videos they've done for Supply Chain Brain magazine on their vested relationship with FedEx, he says the rules of tactical examples. So it does put those rules into, breaks them into 10 contractual elements. Each one of those elements is then broken down into design principles. So it helps people put the theory into practice.
So one of the things that I remember most about the manual is writing the governance sections of the book and really trying to come up with concrete examples of what we understood, the four of us, to be very, very good governance. Can you talk a little bit about the manual's impact on governing these complex partnerships?
We always like to say rule 1 through 4 is to get to a deal, and rule 5 is how you manage and sustain that deal. The governance is a very important component. And a lot of times, organizations, governance and the relational stuff is actually held outside of the contract. So people, the rules of how people work in their contract aren't embracing the relational components. And so we pull those in a more formal way and really bring in just best practices and governance and write those down and say, hey, when you're writing your contract, here's some design principles that you can use to keep your relationship sustainable, especially in times like now, COVID, right? So business happens. You have to use your governance structure to go back and reevaluate and keep your deal in continual alignment of interest.
It's fascinating because what prompted me originally to reach out to you to do this podcast is I'm reviewing requests for information for one of my clients that I'm consulting with. And in some of these responses to the request for information, we've asked them, well, how would you set up a project management office? What governance structure would you want, essentially in an outsourcing? The structure of vested, but without the suppliers calling it vested. And it really struck me in a way that it hadn't in years past, where I'd struggled to get really good governance provisions into agreements, that these companies were saying at this level of work between the service provider and the buying organization, we as the service provider recommend this type of governance. And it was the vested model of governance. Even if they use slightly different words, I immediately was able to recognize it. I think that for me, the joy of going from a place where I was struggling to really understand how to develop the governance chapters, how much we were looking for really good examples of governance. And 10 years later, here we are, and service providers are giving me as a reviewing consultant in their requests for information, governance structures that are what we propose and what we would like all of these companies to propose. So that's been an amazing journey for me over the last 10 years. Have you seen something similar where there's just this greater adoption of the vested principles in a way that this wasn't present 10, 12 years ago when you started the journey?
Well, yeah. So, vested is a system. So there's 5 rules. And so insight versus oversight governance is good governance and good relationships. So that aspect, absolutely, you've seen huge traction. A lot of the major consulting firms have done a lot of work on the area of governance and building out their practices. I know a couple of the major firms have entire governance practices. I've done some really good work with APQC on supplier relationship management and governance in that area. So that rule 5, I think, has really taken off in the last 10 years. What makes vested really different, I think, than just having a good governance is that it is an outcome-based economic model. So vested is 2 things. It's a formal relational contract, and it's outcome-based economic model. And so I've always said any more strategic relationship can benefit from Rule 5, right? Insight versus oversight governance, putting in some of those known best practices. They're not rocket science. When you read them, you're like, of course we should be doing this, right? The hard part, I think, about vested is getting the economic model and following all 5 rules as a system. I had a gentleman that became a big fan, a certified deal architect from our program. And he said he went back to his organization and was trying to teach others in his organization why vested works so well. And he was explaining the rules to them, and people want to cheat on the rules. And he says, well, you
Yeah.
can't really do that. Vested's a system, right? So you have to have, in order to get the magic to happen, the results like we show in Rocky Flats, and the I-35 bridge, right? They had these amazing results, as we profile in the book Vested, how P&G, McDonald's, and Microsoft are redefining winning in business relationships. Those amazing results come because they follow all 5 rules. But anyone can benefit from Rule 5, which is the governance components. And so I'm really excited to see that that's becoming, I won't say standard practice, but when you type in, if you were going to look at governance, 10 years ago, you didn't see very much of it. And now it's in nomenclature. People are talking about supplier relationship management and putting in governance into these relationships. So I'm really glad to see that rule's gotten so much traction. And where we're seeing, which is quite interesting, is yes, people have been, kind of putting Rule 5 into contracts more and more. But as they've had success with that, or they go, that's great, but I'm still held back, they're now starting to come back and really embrace vested as a whole system, right? So by dipping your
that's fantastic.
Rule 5, we have literally companies that have been toying with the idea of vested for 5-6 years, and they're going, you know what, I'm coming up this contract around it, and now I'm going to jump all in and just create a full vested relationship and create this. We teach a formal relational contract with outcome-based economics, and the harder part really is the outcome-based economic model. That's super hard. Fairly easy to apply some of the governance components. And so if you can dip your toe in,
I completely agree.
so if you can dip your toe in, then you can, get more comfortable that these kinds of things that we teach really do work. And when you're ready, then kind of jump off the cliff and go all in. Be vested, right? So be vested with your partner.
So that's a great segue into my next question, which is, how can the vested outsourcing manual support collaboration? I mean, we're in COVID right now. This is, to give listeners an idea, this is December of 2020, so we're in the thick of it. How have you seen vested support your clients?
Yeah, I mean, we've done so much in the last 10 years. And so the manual, it was our second book. It was published in 2011. If I recall, could have been 2012, but I'm pretty sure it was 2011. And so it really is kind of the textbook for how to do these types of deals. And so I think, since then, for example, we offer the university offers 10 courses in our Certified Dual Architect program. When we first started, we had one class. We had one on-site 3-day class that was called Vested Outsourcing. So it was a 3-day exec ed class. Everyone came to Knoxville if they wanted to learn. Now we have 10 courses, 8 of which are online, 2 of which are virtual, and so they can be virtual. And so 2 of those classes we just launched in the last year. One of them is called Getting Ready. And so before you go and start down a vested path, make sure that you're ready. Do you have the right stakeholders on board? This is we teach a formal relational contract. Many attorneys haven't been exposed to relational contracts outside of reading, a Stuart Macaulay or an Ian McNeil article. I know really exciting. I heard the University of Chicago just introduced, actually took our Harvard Business Review article that we had out this past year and began to teach that. Columbia University, I just heard from I got a really wonderful note from a student in Columbia Law School, and she said her professor was now teaching, the Harvard Business Review article and introducing the concepts of relational contracting and what we teach. And so many people are not familiar with that. So I would say slow down, go slow to go fast. And so we have an orientation class. Come learn about what vested is before you start using the manual. The manual really is the textbook. And then complementary to that is a course called Creating a Vested Agreement, where the deal teams actually step through the methodology, one rule, one element at a time. And so take advantage of our free classes, the getting ready class, the orientation class. We have a course called Is Vested Right for Your Situation? Vested is not right for everyone. I laugh, but P&G has 80,000 suppliers. They can't all be strategic. Some of them need to be commodities and very much use the market, right? We may not even have a contract. We may just have a simple PO. So not all deals should apply the vested approach. And so slow down, learn what vested is, learn if it's right for you, right? Take our Is Vested Right for You class, learn if you're ready. Don't jump in if you're not ready. Then and only then you're ready to, begin to actually do a deal. Early on, actually, we saw many companies, not many, but a few companies, say vested sounds really cool, let's go do it. And they weren't ready. And, you kind of take one step forward and two step back. And we're really teaching people, slow down, understand what you're trying to do, and then make sure it's right for you before you move in.
That's fantastic. And it's fantastic to hear other universities besides the University of Tennessee be willing to teach these concepts in the traditional university and law school setting. That's marvelous. What is the next step for the Vested series of thought leadership? What are you working on now as this podcast is released in January of 2021?
Well, that's a great question, and actually very timely, because our 7th book is actually going to be coming out, and it's called Contracting in the New Economy. And it really is aimed at attorneys and commercial managers who challenging them that the fact that these formal relational contracts are real, they work, why they work, how they work. And so that's been probably one of our biggest barriers, is business people get excited about the potential of recreating these new kinds of relationships. And a lot of the attorneys go, well, that's not my standard terms and conditions. That's not my standard contract form. And so the business people really run up and butt up against the attorneys. And it's not, there's good reason why the attorneys are hesitant. We teach shared risk, shared reward, right? And many organizations, especially outside counsel, their job is to protect their company. Why would they want to share risk, share reward? They should be shifting the risk, right? Well, in COVID, that's what's got a lot of companies in problems, because they shifted the risk and their suppliers, can't bear some of that risk. And it's creating a lot of friction. And actually, that was our second Harvard Business Review article that came out later this fall. So well after COVID hit, they asked us to come back and show how what we teach helps people through times of adversity, helps people work through COVID better. And we share 2 examples of organizations who, through COVID, in a very healthy way. Instead of finger pointing, like, wow, business just, as I like to say, it snowed on Mount Everest. What are we going to do about it? Right? You've got the buyers, the climber, and the suppliers of Serpa. So you're in it together when it snows on Mount Everest and your business throws you a COVID. How are you going to get out of it in a shared risk, shared reward way? Instead of going, well, force majeure, or, well, that's not my scope, you have to charge me, I have to charge you extra, you get into scope creep hell. And so the next challenge for us is to tap into those law schools and to create the textbook for the law schools. And I don't know if the Contracting in the New Economy book will do that. It's actually written with 3 attorneys. So I'm the only non-attorney on the I'm just the business professor. But it really is. And what's super cool about it is actually, and Oliver Hart wrote the foreword. So Oliver Hart is a Nobel Prize winning economist. Theories that we teach aren't just nice theories. They really, really work. And the manual was the first, wasn't the first step, but it was the second step on our 10-year journey to begin to unpack these theories and put them into practice. And every time we come out with more work, this will be our 7th book, we go one level further, right? And so we're getting deeper and deeper. strategic sourcing in the new economy and our free online class is vested right for you is targeted to procurement people. Don't do vested if it's not right for you, right? And so each time we come out with more work, it's like layering the onion.
So tell us the name of the Harvard article that you mentioned and where folks can find it.
So just go to hbr.org. So hbr.org and just Google the name of the article is called A New Approach to Contracts, How to Build Better Long-Term Strategic Partnerships. And just Google my last name. So Vitasek. So Vitasek, Google my last name, HBR. You'll find both articles, HBR articles on hbr.org. If you don't have a subscription, people are allowed to download 1 or 2 articles a month. And so you can access it if you have been within your limit, or if you've got a subscription, you can download the PDF, which was actually in the print magazine. So if you've got a subscription,
fabulous.
Yeah, you can do that. So it's a great article. And what we're trying to do is just really approach more from a legal perspective. These business practices that we teach are perfectly legal. Why aren't we putting them in our contracts?
That's a great question. And as a member of the tribe, I can probably go on for an hour about why the lawyers are not putting those, those terms in. I will say that being on the inside, it is a bit of a heavy lift to get legal departments to change their thinking on terms, but it works when you have someone who's knowledgeable about vested and knowledgeable about contracting. You can make that change. I've made the change in my organizations that consult with me, and I'm sure that many other lawyers who are as vested as I am will also be able to make the change in their organizations as well. So Kate, I want to thank you very much for your time. I love the fact that there have been 7 books and that I was so privileged to be a part of the Vested Outsourcing Manual and that you reached out to me when you did. Where can people find more information about Vested in general?
So pretty simple, vestedway.com, vestedway.com. The university has a dedicated website to all of our research. We have a wonderful research library. All of our white papers, all of our case studies are open source. They're in the Creative Commons. You can download them, you can share them. And so we just ask for attribution. And our courses, we've got 10 courses now in our Certified Dual Architect program. 3 are free, 8 are online. So there's no reason why anyone in the world can't begin to learn more about this concept, with so much of the work being in, open source and out there. The one thing I want to say is, do go slow to go fast. Make sure it's the right model for you. Make sure that you're ready. And then when you're ready, jump in with all full feet forward, because it really does work. And the case studies that we have prove that.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you again for your time. I wish you much, much success. I'm sure that there's another 7 books that are in the waiting on the sidelines that are dying to come out and get birthed through you and other collaborators. So much, much success to you. And I look forward to the next couple of years to see what Vested produces.
Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.